Yeah. Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I am your host, Byron Pace. It is the 7th of August, 2020. Today I talk with TV host and eco-journalist Sarah Roberts about her journey from studying animal behaviour to writing environmental children's books and appearing on the famous Blue Peter. We dive deep into the plastics in our oceans and the complex relationship between shark researchers and recreational fishermen. Somewhere in the middle of it all, Sarah tells us about the time she was bitten by a shark. It's a really awesome show, and I had so much fun recording with Sarah. But before we jump into the episode, I need to give a shout out to this week's top tier patrons, which include Richard Stevens, Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of rdcontracting.co.uk, Tom McCraith, James Benjamin Normandale, James Marchington, the guys at South Esher Stalking, Josh Starling, Sean Rowan, Thomas Cameron, and Mark Zabrowski. If you want to help support these shows, head over to patreon.com/PaceBrothers, where you can help make these episodes possible for as little as $1 a month. Now, 2 weeks ago, in our competition to win a copy of Modern Huntsman, who are, of course, our partners on this podcast, we asked you to rate or review the show. And the winner, getting a choice of volume 1 through to 5, is Aquatic Man, who left a review. Well, that is, I don't know if you're actually called Aquatic Man, but that is your name that you left in the review. And the review was left on Apple Podcasts. So thank you very much for the kind words. Shoot me an email, podcast@paceproductionsuk.com, and I will get whichever copy you want out to you. For this week's show, I want to enlist your help to help get this podcast in front of more people. Simply share the show with a friend or tag me, share them with a friend and tag me on social so that I know that you've done it. Or you can stick me on an email if you want, if you don't use social, and I will pick the winner at random in 2 weeks' time to win another copy of Modern Huntsman. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Byron J. Pace and on Facebook at Pace Brothers Film. All Modern Huntsman volumes are now shipping, so if you would like to order your own copy, if you haven't been lucky enough to win, then head over to all the W's, modernhuntsman.com, if you're in North America, and rest of the world, if you want to order a copy, you can do it through our website, which is thepacebrothers.com, and just find the shop, and you will find a page dedicated to Modern Huntsman. Now, a little preemptive side note for something we discuss at the end of the show when we're talking about using crushed basalt rock on agricultural land for extracting carbon from the atmosphere. The technique, which is known as enhanced rock weathering, involves spreading finely crushed basalt, which is a natural volcanic rock, on fields to boost the soil's ability to extract CO2 from the air. Now, the science behind this is pretty straightforward, but I will leave that for one of our science shorts shows so that we can dig into it in more detail. Or if you want to read about it right now, simply head over to thepacebrothers.com, find this episode, and all of the details will be in the show notes, and you can find the article where the original paper was published. But I made a little mistake at the end because off the top of my head, I thought that the amount that I had recalled was 200 million tons of CO2 a year, which could be extracted from the atmosphere. But in actual fact, the recent research suggested that it possibly could capture between 500 million to 2 billion tons of CO2 per year. Now, by way of comparison for these crazy numbers, the Paris Agreement on climate change requires the active removal of between 2 and 10 billion tons of CO2 a year. So this potential technique and use of basalt on agricultural land has the potential to go a long way towards this. Anyway, it really is fascinating, and I would like to do a short show on it, so I will leave it right there. And the last thing I'm going to mention before we jump into this episode is don't forget that on our shop, you can get 15% off if you're a podcast listener by simply using the promo code Into the Wilderness on all Modern Huntsman products. Sarah, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I've been keeping tabs on you the last couple of days, or last week, I think, through your Instagram stories. You've been all over the country.
Yeah, I've been wandering a little bit.
Yeah, a bit of freedom after lockdown, I'm guessing. Well, after like the very strict lockdown.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about you, but I think I was suffering with a little bit of cabin fever over that period of time. So pretty much took the opportunity to go down and visit some friends in Dorset and get some ocean time. And then feeling out a few things on the work front. And then actually had a really cool networking holiday, I want to say, because it ended up much more play than work, over in Pembrokeshire as well. Just getting as much outdoor time as I could get, really.
Oh, tremendous! Yeah, you were. I saw you. Were you swimming or boating in the ocean and swimming in a river somewhere yesterday?
Yeah, lots of wild
the water's
swimming.
cold here, right?
Yeah, I'll be honest, the ocean swimming was probably the coldest bit, but we had the novelty of this amazing human being who had developed puffin hats, where he could swim really close up to puffins and had like floating decors. So
what?
Decoys, yeah, who can resist that? You have to get in the water, right?
Were you doing this? Was this something that kind of turned into work, or were you just doing it because that sounds awesome?
We were. It was a few of us together, and Lizzie Daly had arranged it. So yeah, we were just sort of going with the flow and enjoying swimming with seals and having a lot of banter. Actually, mostly more than anything else.
Did you get close to some puffins?
One nearly flew over my head, but apparently I wasn't looking the right direction. I was too busy looking at the seals. But yeah, that guy takes some amazing pictures. But there weren't that many puffins where we were, particularly that day. Is it bad to say I was mostly looking for spider crabs at the time? And then we ended up mackerel fishing after that. So,
good.
Yeah.
I always like getting some mackerel in the freezer at this time of year for the rest of the year.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, we were intent on trying to catch something, but I mean, our luck wasn't always quite there, as is always the fun with nature and wildlife.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I really wanted to start this interview by asking you about a British institution, really, which is Blue Peter. As I was reading up a little bit about you for this podcast, like, no freaking way. You've been on Blue Peter. Now, a lot of our listeners are not in the UK. And so I should probably just explain. I think Blue Peter is probably the longest running children's sort of educational children's program on television here. And you were on the show. Explain that to me. How did that come about?
Badge.
No way. Okay, so you're now. If I remember rightly, it has been a very long time since I watched Blue Peter. You now need to make your way up to.
Yeah.
Well, eventually gold, right? Gold is like the pinnacle. That's like getting an MBE, basically.
Yeah, that's like David Attenborough level of Blue Peter, isn't it? Yeah, you have to go on. I don't know how many times before you're allowed a gold badge. But yeah, it was basically it came about. To talk about my book and to talk about plastic in the ocean at the time, but not just plastic in the ocean. I was also explaining about how plastic can affect animals in totally different ecosystems that you often do not place or associate with plastic. For example, I was kind of going through the links of how plastic can actually affect grizzly bears. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, it's a different setup filming in studios though than what I'm used to.
Because you're always out in the wild somewhere.
Yeah, I am, and I think a lot of the filming and storytelling that I do, it's never scripted. It's always off the cuff, and there's a lot of pressure when you've got a lot of big lights shining on you and huge cameras. But it was an experience. I went on News Round as well.
I was just going to ask you about that because that was the other thing I remember as a kid. I'd like come back from school and then your mom or dad would like shovel breakfast dinner like in front of you, and you'd sit and you'd watch News Round and Blue Peter. And News Round was like it's a kids orientated and friendly version of the news, basically.
Yes, very professional. In fact, I feel like most good news reporters started their career in
It's amazing, actually. Like how many really hard hitting news reporters today started there. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and Blue Peter as well. I mean, when we were young, Blue Peter used to be, as I would say, the window to all opportunities. Like quite a lot of the Blue Peter presenters that we knew in our youth are still all in TV nowadays, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So what was, were you covering similar kind of stuff on Newsround?
Yeah, same, but different. It was basically about. Well, actually, I think I divulged a lot into sharks by this point. Now I think about it, it's mostly sharks and shark adaptations, and then somebody swallowed Stanley as well. So a little bit of everything that I'd been doing for the last few years, I guess. Before that.
So how did this children's book come about?
Well, Stanley actually was first conceived in 2013, I would say. So just on my return from working in the Bahamas at Shark Lab. So I was working on this tiny, tiny little island doing shark research. And
cool. We're gonna come back to that.
Yeah. So one thing that I'd noticed there was every time the weather changed, even though it was a tiny remote place, you just get loads and loads of plastic on the beach. So I was taking what I'd learned in the field into schools by this point, and had started a bit of an outreach program. And I was trying to think of a more fun way to talk about these topics that are often pretty daunting and, for children in some cases kind of boring, or they had been when we'd been taught about reduce, reuse, recycle in school. And then Stanley came about as an answer to that. I'd kind of wrote it in the first place very tongue-in-cheek, quite sarcastically, and then after a few years of going into school and like selling more copies, I think originally it was self-published. It sold just about just over 4,000 copies, and then of course,
that's amazing for being self-published.
Yeah, I mean he was. Yeah, I mean, well, do you know what? At the time, it was pretty much. It seemed like the only option because nobody wanted to talk about it. I mean, I stupidly sent it off with grand ideas like this would be great in the supermarket. I had Stanley's better-looking cousin, which is a bag for life with a little slogan on the front, and.
So Stanley, a plastic bag?
Stanley, spoiler alert, yes. So Stanley is no ordinary jellyfish that basically floats around the ocean. He gets chewed up, swallowed, and spat back out by lots of different creatures. And then you get clues along the way as to what creature has swallowed him, and the kids have to guess. And then at the very end, there's the big reveal, and he gets upcycled into something else. But yeah, I ended up not really getting that much traction in terms of publishers or supermarkets or anyone. I think one of the best comments I got was it's far too scary for children. And then good old Attenborough and the trends and the fashions and the hard work of so many scientists and so many people that have been advocating more education on plastic pollution sort of came to fruition, didn't it, a couple of years ago? And there we are. Plastic became a really big thing. I was lucky enough to be introduced to Scholastic, and now the book's actually out in, I think, over 30 different countries in lots and lots of different languages. So he's making waves abroad now. It's really weird.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So if we rewind for a moment, because we've been talking about TV, Newsround, Blue Peter, book published, but where did this start for you? Is this something that you studied? Was it zoology or biology? What was your into this fascination with nature and then pursuing it as a career?
So my degree was actually animal behaviour, and I specialised in olfaction and electrosense in sharks, and then. Kind of I guess before even doing the degree, I already knew, as a lot of kids do, that I wanted to work with animals. So like throughout the degree, I also worked in a few different field research roles and worked in the zoo as well, ironically in the education department, which was probably the thing that gave me the foundation for the communication side of what I do. And then, straight off the bat from uni, I ended up working with dolphins in the Welsh coast, and then going to the Bahamas to work with sharks out there for a while. And I think
that's a slight change in environment. Welsh coast to the Bahamas.
Yeah, especially because it was straight after uni, so the Welsh coast was very much horizontal rain, sat on a seafloor for about 3 months in the depths of winter. And then I guess like actually, I'll tell you what, there was a moment. I was in the Bahamas. I'd always wanted to be a naturalist. I'd always wanted to make videos, but I didn't really have the balls to do it because you get through that.
It takes a lot to like look into a camera and like say stuff in a confident manner and not think that people are going to think you're an idiot, even if you're not.
It's the what other people think part, I think, that holds us back from doing anything fun most of the time. But yeah, so I was actually we had a lot of camera crews that would go in and out of the field station, and I was working as a safety diver on one of the shoots, which basically involves sitting behind the cameraman and pushing all the sharks away while they film whatever they're trying to film. And then ended up in the local bar with them afterwards. And I think after a few rums, I spilled out my inner secrets, which was, I really want to make content, but I don't dare to do it. And the camera guys were so supportive that they put me in touch with an agent in the UK. And that in turn actually spurred me on, because she was like, yes, this is a great idea. However, we need to see how you can cope in front of a camera. So that spurred me on to make the first film reel, which I was only able to make because we were really, really busy out there, but because I'd had that small slip up with a shark where it bit me. So I actually, well.
Where did it bite you?
On my arm. It was my own fault. But I think I was like bite number 56 at the lab or something by this point.
Oh,
but,
right, okay.
Yeah, that's a good time to find out there's no doctor on the island as well.
So, seriously though, how much damage was done to your arm? Was it through a wetsuit or?
No, I was in a bikini actually.
Okay.
No, it was a 1 meter lemon shark. So it's left a pretty gnarly scar. It went down to the fat layer. I was pretty lucky. It's actually in the chunkier bit, I guess, of my forearm rather than towards where all of the important areas are near your wrist. I went down to the fat layer and sort of opened everything up, and then as I said, we found out afterwards while I had this really professional bloke poking around, umming and ahhing, who then declared he was a dentist.
Arms are kind of like teeth.
Yeah, I think he was just more curious because he'd never seen a shark bite before. And, this great big Caribbean bloke, happy and jovial, like, oh man, yeah, look at this, wow! I was like, okay, but do I need stitches? Well, I don't know. What?
Maybe.
So that was where technology really came into its own. So there was a whole Skype session just featuring my arm. The guy that owned the lab, his daughter lived in the States, and that was a plastic surgeon, I think. Basically, with the limited stuff that we had, iodine and peroxide, it was a case of boil water, hold your arm in peroxide for 10 minutes, diluted in the boiled water, and then the same with iodine, and you had to repeat that 3 times a day. So actually getting bitten doesn't hurt that much compared to cleaning a shark back wound. And then it just was eventually, after about a month or so, started knitting itself back together, which is I don't really recommend. I think you're probably better going to a doctor, like in hindsight, but anyway.
Needs must. You need to put your arm back together.
Exactly. It did the job eventually. But because of that, because obviously gangrene risks and the rest, couldn't really go in the water for a little while, which left me with this time to actually start filming some things. And that was why I was able to film my first film reel, which is funny because when you watch it, you'd never know because I've got a bandage and then cling film around the bandage and then a rash vest over my arm. But if you look closely at my facial expressions while holding that small shark, you can see I am mildly uncomfortable about the whole situation.
So how long ago was that?
God, that was 2013. So a while ago. And then since then I ended up working all around the world, I guess. I worked in Africa, in the middle of the bush with dwarf mongoose of all creatures. And then I worked as a grizzly bear guide in Canada for a bit, and the whole time just sort of filming as I went. And then the filming and the storytelling took over, and now I'm in a position where I'm really lucky. I can work with a few brands and things to actually go out and just source the stories and meet the people, and probably not slow them down by having to train me up to maybe not quite be there as long as they quite want me to be if I'm only there for a year or so. So no, it's good, really. All's good.
That's amazing. So were you sort of tagging along with research projects? Was that your sort of foot in the door to a lot of these places?
Absolutely, yeah. So for most of the jobs, I would go as like a field research assistant, which was great for me because it's very hands-on. It gets you and puts you into these close encounters with wildlife, and you actually experience so much more than you would otherwise, especially like in Africa, because all our research was sun up till sundown on your own in the bush on foot. So you'd see all sorts of things. And then I sort of veered out of that because field research is terribly unpaid career to go
really
into.
Is,
so
yeah.
necessity
so
calls.
important, but so
important.
underfunded.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's a whole nother story. But yeah, there needs to be a lot more money put into that world. But then I sort of spurred into guiding. All came about because I was sketching an idea for another book which involved grizzly bears, and I thought, well, I've never seen a grizzly bear. And I found a job on the internet and thought, well, why not?
Just making it happen.
Yeah. Took a punt.
So then you got on a plane, headed over to Canada, and now you're a grizzly bear guy. There must have been a little bit of training involved in that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Yeah. There was quite a few moments early days where I thought I'd definitely bitten off more than I could chew there. I think my boss was a little bit of a joker hiring me, but I sent a very, very cocky cover letter that I would cringe at if I had to read back now, but I had at the time nothing to lose and thought, well, why not? I think it was something along the lines of, having worked with one of the most dangerous predators in the ocean, I think it's about time to encounter one on land with claws as big as your fingernails, some sort of rubbish. You must have thought, oh God, yeah, she'll be hilarious to watch struggle through this. But yeah, it was great actually. I went out there. I had to do 2-week wilderness first responder course first, which really, really sort of puts into perspective how I should have cleaned a shark bite wound, but also, what can go wrong in these situations, because you are out on a limb. We were on a floating lodge, you could only reach by seaplane, and we're the only lodge in the inlet. So, and then, there was quite a vast amount of training before you were able to take guests out. One of which is you had to read a book which was Causes and Avoidance of Bear Attacks. Highly recommend if anyone's got a bit of morbid curiosity, but it pretty much documents in very fine detail every single bear attack since I think it's like the 1950s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, The Revenant is accurate, I'll tell you that.
Great film. Great. Yeah. So who were you guiding? Like, was it just people who wanted to see bears, or was it other trips that they were on? More sort of protection against bears for doing other things?
No. So that particular place, it's called Great Bear Lodge, and it's in Nickite Estuary, and it was very much ecotourism operation. So you had a lot of people that, it was their lifelong dream to come and watch grizzly bears and the salmon run. We get the odd film crew through too, but for the most part, it was just really, really lovely people that had finally got this opportunity to come out and encounter grizzly bears in the wild. So they came from all over, from Australia, from England, from Canada, from America, and essentially it's your job to do your damned hardest to make sure they see a bear, which, some seasons are a lot harder than others with that, but you do your best.
So you're actually taking them on foot and tracking. I'm assuming you must be armed for protection as a last resort.
Yeah, so it's so funny the amount of positions that I've been in where you are essentially on your own on foot, and it seems to me that the defense mechanism is always the same, whether it's Africa or here or over there. It seems to just be pepper spray.
Mm-hmm.
So
that was it.
Yeah, you've got very concentrated version with the bears. You get bear spray, but with Africa on foot, in case you saw a lion, we had pepper spray too. So it's you just don't really want to get to that position. But
no, absolutely not.
The thing about the grizzlies, it was actually 50% on boat and 50% on foot. So you were actually in a small rowing boat or out of a small rowing boat for half of that, pulling it along against the current and hoping to God the guest would look at the bear quickly so you could get back in before the boat floated off.
Oh, it must have been amazing to spend so many times with this incredibly charismatic animal, and also to see the salmon run.
Yeah.
I mean, we have salmon here where I live up in Scotland, obviously, and I've seen salmon in other countries, but I've never seen what we're talking about here is one of the greatest migrations on Earth, essentially.
Yeah.
And I've obviously witnessed it through my TV screen, but I've never seen it in person. It must be incredible.
Yeah, it's really. It's incredible. It's also quite smelly. And it's also like the realization of what these fish actually go through is phenomenal. I mean, their sense of smell to be able to find water droplets from the river that they hatched in the middle of the ocean, and then to follow that concentration all the way back to this river. I mean, the one thing I didn't realize before I got there was just how much effort these fish actually put in. I mean, they don't actually eat during their stretch up river. For the most part, their whole energy goes to swimming against the current. So their body actually breaks down all different internal organs, even their skin, sometimes even their eyeballs. So like when they actually get right up to the top when they're spawning, they're basically zombies. And of course, the appreciation for how important that is in the ecosystem, because the trees around the edge of the river, they're so much larger. Even the mule deer are actually eating the salmon. So they support so many different species. But what's crazy is just how small those salmon runs are now becoming every year. And like most of that, unfortunately, comes back down to human impact. So yeah, it's just really, really important part of the ecosystem.
To replace that level of nutrients that they gain at sea in the ocean, that gets dragged all the way inland, like you're explaining, that goes into the trees, and then the bears eat it, and then there's a whole heap of other scavengers that go to get that level of nutrients all the way inland to be able to replace it. It is nigh on impossible without the salmon runs.
Yeah, and we've tried so many different things, whether it's hatcheries, for example, trying to offset it by sticking in extra salmon for recreational fishing. I mean, the problem that you then have is you've eliminated natural selection. So you get these fish that come in that have been grown in optimal conditions that then get put into the river. They're larger than the naturally selected, wild salmon that are there. So they outcompete them at an early age, but they don't find their way back to the river because quite often they'll die at sea. So then that also has a detrimental effect on the salmon that, would have been hatching otherwise. And then we've got the situation with overfishing. Plastic pollution also has an effect. You've got the fish farms. We've tried a lot of things to try and really manipulate the system to our benefit, but actually I think there's a certain level where you have to really just have a respect for nature and think maybe it's time we take a step back and just let it recover on its own.
The amazing thing is with something like a salmon run and their life cycle, if we did give it the space to recover, it would recover really quickly, and we've seen pockets of that before. But it's under so much pressure continually, whether that be inland environmental restrictions like the building of dams, or whether that be the overharvesting at sea. I mean, there is the other element, which is sort of the umbrella of all of this, which is changing sea temperatures, and climate change, which is a very complicated web of food systems, which will be impacting it in ways that we even fully don't understand now.
Absolutely.
But it can recover. It is possible, and we have shown that it's possible.
Well, I mean, I've actually been speaking with a few different professionals on this topic recently for another job of mine, and there's so much new findings, so much new research, but so much we still don't know. I mean, basically, it seems that the salmon in the north are and this is sort of the north coast, I'm talking America here, the northwest coast seems to be better adapted to the change in river temperatures, I guess, than the ones in the south. And also you've got situations where like natural landslides happen and we write off the fishing populations, but then what happens nobody expects, but the salmon actually come back stronger and stronger each year instead. We just wrote it off as a dead river. So nature, to quote Jurassic Park, will find a way. But it's, quite often it needs us to sort of give it space to do that.
Let's talk about plastic pollution a little bit. I've clearly not had enough coffee this morning because that's about the third word that I've tripped over. Plastic. You mentioned plastic pollution right at the start, and I know that was a major focus. Of course, that was one of the things you were talking about on Blue Peter. So what was it that really drove you to dig into that as something that you ended up gaining a huge amount of knowledge about?
Well, I mean, in the very first place, I obviously, like everybody else, knew that litter was bad. You know, you'd go to.
We understand that from a young age.
Exactly, from a very young age, you see it washed up.
Well, we should.
Yeah, you should. And then, I knew that animals and wildlife could get entangled in it. I knew they could eat it. I knew those obvious things. But I guess when I started going into school, you've got that pressure to be much more educated than whoever you're teaching, haven't you? Yeah. You've got to be one
so
step
pick really
above.
Young kids. That's what pick really young kids, and then you just seem smart.
Yeah, there's always one that has the questions you really never expected to come out of a 9-year-old's mouth. Yeah, so that pushed me to really start reading actual science papers and looking into much more depth. And I guess when I started to learn more about the microplastic situation, and then not just the microplastic situation, but also how plastic behaves in water, how it bonds with heavy chemicals, heavy metals, and then just seeing paper after paper. I mean, I found it super frustrating knowing how screwed we were in 2013 and 14, and so many people. They were still doing balloon releases. Nobody wanted to talk about it.
That's crazy, isn't it?
And you're kind of thinking, well, wait a minute, like the whole machine is broken here. I don't know how to stop it. It's like being on a train and not being able to pull the stop cord. Like, I guess it was so ridiculous to me that this was such a hugely important topic that had the potential to absolutely screw not just like one ecosystem, but the whole planet. I couldn't sort of fathom why we weren't talking about it more. So that's why I put a bit of time into to create Stanley, just hoping that it would suddenly become a bit of a penny drop moment for people, and also an easier way to introduce that into class, and then teachers could build on that. But I was saying it was frustrating for me finding out about microplastics and all of that information in 2013, but the papers that were published on this, they were dated back 20 years. It's not new knowledge. That's why we always talk about plastic in the ocean, because there's so much more published on plastic in the ocean. But I mean, doing that wilderness first responder course, one of the sayings that they used to use was dilution is the solution to our pollution. And that was looking at, snake bites and all sorts of things. But actually, you put that to this, the oceans are the biggest, largest, most diluted place on Earth. And if we've got a problem there, we need to be looking in soils. We need to be looking in streams. We need to be looking in lakes, because it's going to be affecting everywhere. So, yeah, I can't imagine the frustration that scientists must have had for all that time, knowing what they know. And it's just the same with climate change and every other topic. So I guess for me, then I've made it a bit of a mission to try and help these scientists as best I can to communicate it to the general public in a way that appeals to people that maybe otherwise wouldn't be interested.
Yeah, you kind of hit on a really key point there, and it's much more well known and kind of accepted as a job now, which is exactly what you're talking about. It's just science communication.
Yes.
There's a lot of, I know a lot of really brilliant science communicators around the world, but there's no point doing the research if no one really knows about it who's going to act upon it.
Yeah.
Case in point, the the research that's been done on plastic. So having a way to break that research down in a way that's consumable for your average person, so they can understand the true impact of what that means. And selfishly, it almost has to be what it means to their lives.
Absolutely,
For many people to actually take a stance or make a change.
Yeah, 100%. You have to look at the situation unfolding, and then just find, like, you almost have to figure out a new way of shining a light, presenting it in a totally different topic. I mean, the book I did, it's all presented from Stanley's perspective, because at the end of the day, the carrier bag isn't really the bad guy. He didn't want to end up in the ocean. It's our fault for dropping him in there. So this poor bag that gets chewed up, swallowed, and spat back out, and you feel really sorry for this jellyfish that's no ordinary jellyfish all the way through. And I think it's trying to, I guess, retell the stories in a way that people can relate to for their everyday lives. That's one of the hardest things, because if people don't feel like they're a part of it, or it doesn't affect them, then they're less inclined to do anything about it.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see, I mean, we're already seeing it because I've seen images in the last month, 6 weeks, but certainly we're going to see it over the next year, is the amount of face masks that are ending up in the sea.
Yeah.
And what the impact of that's going to be.
I mean, the plastic producers have kind of had the last laugh there, haven't they? With
because it was free reign to produce basically whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
Because of the global pandemic, and understandably, but zero thought went into actually the disposal of these.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that I've really, really learned over the years, and, it comes as a shock to quite a lot of people, but the plastic industry, I actually have a lot of time for them, and they have supported me more than any other industry since day one with Stanley, in fact, because it is their social responsibility to educate people. And like I said, the whole thing about Stanley is, the bag is not the villain in this. Essentially, it's our own fault for not disposing of it correctly. Now, I wholeheartedly believe that much, much more money should and hopefully will get invested into the infrastructure of recycling. But I don't believe that we can live without plastic. And it's something that I talk to kids in school about a lot. It is such an important resource for us, until we find something, I guess, that's a little bit better. But at this stage, it's the best that we have. In fact, plastic was initially invented because we'd essentially almost killed all of the sea turtles, and we were running out of ivory. So to give you some perspective, elephants and sea turtles were saved because of the creation of plastic. And ironically, sea turtles are now almost threatened most by the creation of plastic in the long run. But I guess you don't have the foresight when this sort of thing happens. But yeah, if you look at the history of plastic, it's that it was created with the best intentions and, of course, the drive for money. But it was created to replace resources that were running out massively. And there's also a lot of misconceptions in terms of, if it's not plastic, then it's automatically better for the environment. That's not true. That is definitely not true. You need to, if you're going to advocate that, you need to look at each resource and really educate yourself on what goes into making that. I mean, paper, for example, it takes trees to make, but when you recycle paper, it takes a lot more energy to recycle paper, and a lot more water, and it creates a lot more offsets of heavy metals than plastic. And we do have the technology to keep improving and to create, instead of having to keep creating from fresh, we don't need to be using fossil fuels to create plastic. Now we can use other things like, sugarcane, for example, is one. There's multiple different options that we can use, and we can even boycott all of that and use sewage to create a plastic substance. But what we have, and what we need to remember, is we've created a product which is essentially a throwaway item, but is absolutely indestructible. So it can't just be thrown away. It has to be used, and only used really in a responsible way that we absolutely need it, and then it's been designed for an end of life. But yeah, I hope that, well, I'm sure that every generation after us has learned from our mistakes. But
you hope,
yeah,
we hope that that's the case, for sure.
But then at the same time, what I absolutely don't want is for us all to just. And I guess I feel this a lot with going into schools and educating. I created the book hoping that it was going to educate teachers and parents at the same time, because what I really hate is the responsibility and the guilt and the panic and the pressure that is pushed onto children now. I mean, you see it with Greta and her movement. It's a lot of panic for young people that are becoming wholeheartedly aware of all the environmental issues, but seeing that older generations, like our age group and above, have really not changed anything, even though we know this, and that's a really tricky situation to navigate, isn't it, for all of us?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and it is if I think about me at primary school at 5-6 years old, which wasn't that long ago. I'm not that old yet. I mean, it was a little bit of time ago.
Yeah, sure.
But these kind of discussions never, it wasn't really something that was discussed. There certainly was nobody coming into the school talking about environmental responsibility. So on top of all the other things because most of the other things that you deal with as a kid, I guess, probably haven't changed that much. I mean, technology has moved on a long way, which means that resources are way more accessible than they were when I was a little kid. But I would imagine if you were to ask even very small kids now, they'll probably have somewhat of a handle on the human impact of the planet.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I would think so.
Yeah, they are.
Is that your feeling from speaking to kids in schools?
Yeah. I mean, it varies as well between schools for sure, and between like areas. I've really sort of gone all over the UK to different schools, like even down in Cornwall to the centre of London to up in Scotland, and it definitely varies school by school. And I think in a city it can be harder to connect children to these issues because, I mean, to want to protect the environment, part of that comes with having the benefits of being out there in the wild, in nature, and experiencing it, and that's such an important role in childhood. That's something that I really do believe makes a difference. But teachers also, like, God, there needs to be so much respect for teachers because they honestly. They make such effort in some places and such an impact on these children from a young age, and that sets them up for life, really. So, yeah, definitely, like, times are changing. Kids know a lot more, but there's always a bit more that we can do as adults to even build on that too.
This kind of outreach that you've been doing in schools. I mean, I'd love to see more of it. I think it's so important to, like you're saying, to connect kids to the real world and sort of outside of the household that and people that they might not be exposed to even within a school environment. But how the issue with many of these outreach programs is how do you fund them? How do you fund the time for somebody to go and do what you're doing? So how have you managed to do it?
Well, I mean, put it this way: I don't own a house. I don't earn a lot of money doing what I do. I do it because I can't walk away from it. That's the thing. Like, I've tried.
But that shouldn't be a necessity. Like that takes somebody to, make. I mean, and most good things are made with sacrifices, but that's not a sustainable model. If we really want to shape the minds of young people to forge a new path and a better future, we need money to help fund it.
And it's not just, I mean, look, I'm lucky. I cannot complain. I've been very, very lucky, and I've had a lot of support from Scholastic, my publisher. They've been absolutely great. And they help, and authors abroad as well. Like, I'm slowly getting into a situation where what I do is slightly more sustainable. But I'm not going to lie, I've had to invest quite a lot of my own money. I've had to work, just any old job for stints just to then reinvest all of that into getting to these places, finding these stories, and then taking those back into schools. But I wouldn't do anything else. There's nothing else on the planet that I would do. And also, like, my alternative was to stay in science, and they're not earning much money either. It's a real issue. I mean, my YouTube channel is called Sarah's Real Job because my mum was always asking when I was going to get one.
Who wants a real job?
Exactly. But you've struck on something that's so important. Nothing is going to get us out of this situation other than understanding, knowledge on how to adapt, how we're impacting things, how we can improve. And science is so important. But unfortunately, unless it's a direct link to a monetary gain, because we just don't seem to value ecosystems as something that should have a monetary gain. Even, do you know what I mean? Like, basically,
we need to value them for their intrinsic value rather than what we can get out of them.
Absolutely, and we don't, unfortunately, and our governments don't, and everyone's in it for their own gain, and unfortunately, that's where conservation and science and ecotourism, all these things, they kind of dip out a little bit there. And realistically, they should have the most funding. Especially knowing what we know about climate and about the way the planet's going. But no, it's something that needs to shift, definitely.
I think if there was a true appreciation at a governmental level of what the cost of ecosystem services truly are. Like the problem is that we don't actually understand what the full knock-on effect of the implications of our actions are in many instances. But if we did, I think there would be a lot more money funneled into it because it would save us economic hardship in the long term. And I think historically, humans, as with the societies that we form, we're very often more concerned about short-term gain than what the long-term benefit is going to be. And when we're talking about long-term, it's not decades, we're talking hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah, and I think that what we have lost and what society has lost in this consumeristic world where you can just walk into a supermarket and there you go, there's your chicken, your beef, whatever, it's all there to buy, there's your fish. You've no connection anymore to the ecosystem that it came from. You've no connection to the amount you're taking. And we sort of, for the most part, sit humans aside from the food chain. It's almost like we are above the animals on our own little playing field and not connected to them. And like you say, like, if people knew, if people only knew, we would all be valuing that a lot higher than we do.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I asked you about something before we get to the end of the podcast, which was some of the work that you were doing with shark research.
Yeah.
And I think it was tagging sharks and also working with local fishermen, and this strange contradiction between people actually wanting to catch and drag sharks in with hook and line, and the work with the scientific community. What was that you were involved in there?
Yeah, so basically, I've always been interested in the grey areas that aren't necessarily black and white, and as you know, you'll find a lot of them in the world of conservation. But shark fishing particularly has really interested me. I was originally involved a little bit in the tagging world, I guess, and the shark research world with the start of my career. So with that job, there was a lot of fishing every day, and then we'd catch the sharks, we'd take measurements, we'd put tags in, depending on what the study was about. And it was always for the greater good of trying to protect various different habitats for these sharks. So I guess the concept of catching a shark, it wasn't something that was totally unnatural and totally foreign for me. And I understood with that there is a little bit of a thrill involved in fishing, of course. And then my friend Hannah Med, actually, from American Shark Conservancy, is out in Florida now. And she's running a study which is very, very interesting. She's one of the first people that I'm aware of that can actually work directly with the recreational shark fishermen over there who are catching great hammerheads off the beach of Florida. Now, there's so much controversy involved around this. First of all, great hammerheads they're particularly vulnerable. They can't buccal pump, which means that they have to be swimming all the time to get oxygen into their blood.
Sorry to interrupt you, but are all sharks like that? Because I had this little thing in my head that all sharks had to continually swim.
No.
Is this an old wives' tale?
Yeah. So different species have different adaptations. Some species, such as a tiger shark that can sit in the waves, can just sit on the bottom and basically open and close its mouth and push water over their gills. So it depends whether they have a connection between the gills and the back of the mouth, basically. But yeah, it depends also on like how they live. So pelagic species like great white sharks, they'll have to keep swimming their whole life, for example, to keep the oxygen in their blood. But yeah, so she had put herself in a very unique situation where well, I guess to backstep, there is so much controversy about these hammerheads, about the survival rate. So even though it's a catch and release fishing industry, there is a lot of controversy about whether or not these sharks are actually surviving. And, there's the shark diving industry who see the sharks swimming around with hooks and line in the mouth, which obviously is not very nice to see. But then also, there had been a few hammerheads that washed up on the beaches of Florida, and that automatically sort of created even more pressure to ban recreational shark fishing. However, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, especially with governments and just the situation that's going on over there. So Hannah's quite a logical person. She's a shark expert, and she basically was able to build a relationship with the shark fishermen who absolutely are guarded and really do want to protect their industry, because these guys have been doing it since 13, 12 years old, and generations before them. For them, it's like it's their hobby, it's everything they love, and they really do believe that they do everything right, and the sharks are released and they swim off, and these other people are just out to get them. So Hannah is in a position where she's actually fitting tags on these sharks, satellite tags that stay on the shark for 2 weeks after the recreational fisherman has caught it, and they provide accurate data as to whether or not the sharks are able to survive afterwards. She also takes information about how long the sharks are on the line, the type of bait, the conditions, all sorts of things, because obviously the longer you're fighting a hammerhead, the more energy it's burning. Survival rate, we assume, may go down. So I was lucky enough to go and sleep on the beaches of Florida with these salty dog fishermen and really get to know them, and to spend some time with Hannah and learn more about that. But then I also met some people from the other side of things. So I met Jim Abernathy, who's a big shark diver and shark tour operator in the area. So he has a lot to gain from this industry not happening. And there's just so many strong feelings in each direction. It's interesting.
Is the decline in the hammerhead sharks that you're talking about, have they linked that to recreational fishing, or is there a bigger picture here and that's just a component of it?
We don't know. That's the answer.
Because it seems like when you say recreational, this is people on the shore fishing with a rod and line,
right? Yeah. So basically, at this point, anybody could go out with a rod and reel and just stick it in and try the best to catch one of these sharks.
But no one was eating them.
Nobody's eating them. It was catch and release. But the problem is, it is still really very much a totally unregulated industry. And what has happened since I was out there filming is they released permits. People had to get a permit to do it, which just basically meant you fill in some form and give a little bit of money, and then you got one. And it was a real indicator that actually there's a lot more people out on the beaches doing this than they ever realised. You don't need any training to be able to do this. Bear in mind, like, you catch these sharks in the middle of the night. This is a 4-meter shark that you're catching. The best time to catch it is in high swell, and you've got to then grab a tail rope around the back of it, grab its dorsal in swell, most of the people, as I said, are young when they start. That was a real shocker to me. Like, I did not expect to be sat around the beach with like 14-year-olds, 17-year-olds, you know, and without any proper training or, you know, any, maybe not even a responsible adult there in some cases, or even if you have a responsible adult, if they don't know what they're doing, it doesn't bring much to the table. So, you know, for me, it was a bigger of a shocker, like all the possibilities of things that could go wrong. So Hannah, like one of the key things of the study is really to make recommendations, because we know it's probably not going to get banned. And, you know, it may not need to get banned, because actually these people, and it's the same with hunters across the board, quite often they have so much knowledge, they've gathered so many skills. For me, it would be a crying shame if you were to just totally outright ban these sports, rather than actually finding a way to link them. Because, you know, scientists, I went out catching sharks having never caught a shark in my life, and that was suddenly part of my job. Like, you're going out there with very few skills and learning on the job. But I mean, you've got these people that have all this knowledge, that have, you know, gathered it generation to generation, and all this experience. And if we just get rid of that, you know, we could actually use it to our advantage to actually protect the species. So yeah, it's an interesting concept, and it's something that I am still a little bit involved in. And
it's fascinating, really fascinating, because I know I have, you know, I fish, and I put fish in my freezer. I also hunt and put meat in my freezer.
Yep.
But I do have a hard time thinking about catching and releasing these very large sharks for no other purpose other than completely your own pleasure. And that's not me saying that I don't take pleasure when I'm fishing or take pleasure when I'm hunting, but at least it's, well, certainly with the hunting and fishing that I do, there is, the intention is, although I do release a lot of fish because they're undersized, well, normally because they're not big enough, because I don't have the skill to catch many big fish.
Yeah.
But I'm normally fishing for trout or less so salmon these days. But the intention is that I'm putting something in the freezer ultimately at the end of the day, or you know, I might be, say it's rabbit control. You know, that's part of population management for agricultural crops or pigeons or whatever it might be. But here it's very clearly just completely a sport. It is for the enjoyment of the people who are catching them and then releasing them, putting these animals under a huge amount of stress, which is much, they feel it much more the bigger the animal is. And like you were saying, the longer the fight, the less chance that they're going to have to actually survive. So unless there's really a mechanism to harness this desire that they have for this sport and funnel, well, you know, maybe that is the permit system that they now have. So we're able to permit it and funnel that money into the conservation of the species.
Yeah.
But if that isn't in place, I have a really hard time with it, because what purpose does it serve? It serves absolutely no purpose. It's just, it has a complete negative effect on the species. And I think that harnessing the fascination that people have, whether you agree with it or not, because I do have a hard time with that type of fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, listen.
But I can see where the benefit could lie if there was the mechanisms.
Well, you've got to look back in history, right? So it's not that long ago that we were just harvesting the sharks. You know, you were doing all of this, and they would drag it out onto shore, dangle it from a dock, and be like, "Look, this is the amazing shark." And you know, in some places still do that. But times have changed, and now that's frowned upon, and now it's catch and release instead. But times are changing still, and there's this opportunity to think, well, you know, that was all well and good, but now we know a bit more. Can we improve it further? And that's where Hannah's at with this. She's in a really unique position over there, just to give the sharks the best possible chance of survival by making certain recommendations to government about how they can move forward on that, and working with the fishermen. I mean, kudos to them. Like, they don't have to be a part of that, but a lot of the people within that sport, all the people in that sport, they want the sharks to survive because they want the sport to continue. So if there's a way of ensuring that the sharks definitely are surviving, or changing the odd technique here and there, they are open to that for the most part. You get good and bad people in every sport. But then, like it is further still, like how else can we make this actually worthwhile, like offset it in a way that, because I'm not interested in going out and catching it doesn't appeal to me, but obviously it still appeals to other people. Is there a way that you can actually get something more out of this that could then in turn, like you say, whether it's monetization to protect species or whether it's research, is there something else that we can do to offset that? If it's because like I say, these things probably aren't going to get banned, especially in Florida, anytime soon. So like, how do we further improve things?
I suppose the parallel to that would be, if I'm looking closer to home, most rivers in Scotland and actually up and down a lot of the UK now, it's mandatory catch and release for salmon.
Yeah.
Because of the decline of the population, over the last 50, 60 years. And so you still have people who will go and happily pay their money for the chance of catching a salmon, knowing that they'll never be able to take it home and they'll never be able to eat it. And they're very careful about putting it back. I'd say, largely speaking, people who fish for salmon are fairly well educated in the handling procedure and with the knowledge that they want to catch a fish, play it as quickly as possible so that they're not, so it's not a protracted period where they're fighting the fish, and then never take it out the water, unhook it and put it back. Clearly that is only because we enjoy, there's this, deep-seated, very primitive part of us that enjoys the feeling of catching a fish. And I totally understand that because I do it too.
Yeah.
But it's... on the face of it, you think, well, that serves absolutely no purpose, and all you're doing is increasing the risk that fish that you've now caught is not going to survive to spawn. Yeah. However, a lot of the money that goes into the fisheries trusts and the fisheries boards that pay for the biologists within those river systems is funded by those those people who come and fish.
Yeah.
And now you can see the circles. Okay, well, yeah, maybe there is a certain percentage of mortality, and I think we fairly well understand what that is with salmon now, with catch and release. That is worth it. That is a price we are willing to pay as a society in order to fund the other work that is going on.
Yeah, and look, there's more to it than even that. You hit upon it a little bit with, we have this innate desire as humans, I think a lot of people do, to go out and catch things. It's the animalistic instinct. Yes, it may serve no purpose because they then have to release it, but the desire is there in a lot of people, and it does sort of light a little internal fire, I think, when people go out and it's the thrill of the, trying to outwit this creature, I guess, to some extent. But look, if that also being out there in nature, standing on that river, holding that fishing rod. My dad was a fisherman. My uncle is a fisherman. My brother's a fisherman. I know what their catch rate is. It's absolutely diabolical. They shoot me for saying that. But for the most part, what they are doing is connecting to the wild. And they are, they are absolutely loving being somewhere that then wholeheartedly they are going to want to protect for future generations.
Absolutely.
And so that also plays a key point in it. We could all back off and we could all say, oh, that's wrong, this is terrible, that's wrong. But for me, it's like poachers make the best groundskeepers. These people understand the balance of nature better than other people that have never experienced that. And that knowledge and that skill is still very important, and it's something that needs to be passed on and it needs to be kept so that we don't totally, we already have overshot carrying capacity for the most part, but we need to understand, we need to get rid of this consumeristic mindset, and we need to really understand our part in the ecosystem and, how much we can take, what we can take, and noticing patterns of where things aren't coming back and they're not catching, because it's easy for people in the towns, in the cities, or, anywhere really, to say, oh, well, I really don't like people going out and doing this for the fun of it. But then they might still go home and eat a steak or something. And, everything's a bit more grey than we ever give it credit for.
I'm very much a big believer in obviously harnessing technology so that we're causing the minimal impact that we can on the planet and the environment around us, but also being cognizant of the fact that we have this incredible wild resource around us, and we are a part of it. And because we are part of it, we can also play that role, which is to use it as other animals use one another. But we have the knowledge to be able to do it sustainably. So we can look at our deer populations and we can harvest a certain proportion of them, and they will the herds there will potentially get bigger and stronger depending on how we're harvesting them and how we're managing them. And having that knowledge that we can use wild resources in a sustainable manner, I think is an incredibly responsible position to take. But I think we, in some parts of society, we want to move away from that, where we are not taking anything from the wild environment at all. And it can sometimes be mixed messages because we're continually talking about how we're over extracting, and that is true in so many cases. But it is also true that by using wild resources in a responsible and ethical manner, whether that be venison or even timber, we have a way to live in a more sympathetic way in the landscape that is around us.
Yeah.
And I think to not use it is a big mistake.
Yeah.
Because it means that we have to rely on other sources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, coming back to plastic versus other materials, we are quite a lazy species, and if somebody greenwashes something or somebody says, this is really good, most of the time we'll never question it. And I think that's a big problem. It's often if something sounds easier and it sounds like, this is a very simple fix, nothing is ever simple. That is one thing that my career has taught me. There is no such thing as simple, and there's no such thing as like an easy fix. And if it sounds like an easy fix, it's because you're not understanding the problem properly. And I think that, it's not that there's a right and wrong way of doing things, but there has to be a communication between everyone involved in every different industry, and a respect, I guess, there for, the same goes with fishermen and with hunters. There can be a lot of bloodlust and a lack of understanding. You can just get totally hooked on the sport and only care about the one species you're hunting, and still not understand how the rest of the ecosystem is adapted around it. But all of this also comes down to communication, and that's between people in the industry and outside of that. And sharing knowledge and sharing expertise. And I think that that's so important moving forward.
So, Sarah, I could carry on digging into this with you for another 2 hours probably. But I want to touch on something just before we wrap up, which is, I think it's the most recent films that you've put out on YouTube, which is your Big Predator Expedition. Tell me how that came about, and I guess also the name of your YouTube channel, just so people can go and watch these.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, the YouTube channel is Sarah's Real Job, because my mum was always asking when I get one. And you're like,
I never want a real job, Mum, if that's okay with you.
It's actually, I would say it's more real than any of the other jobs I've ever done. I just don't get paid much for it. But yeah, it's the Big Predator Expedition was about looking at a few different grey areas. So the shark diving industry I looked at, and I went out on a shark dive out there in Florida and had a look about how, basically feeding sharks and chumming sharks is affecting their behaviour, and how that also can have a bit of a knock-on effect in the food chain. I also looked at snakes, and I was looking at reptiles, I guess, in the Everglades, and how they are being affected by the amount of roads going through there as well, and traffic, and then invasive species. And then also looked at alligators and nuisance gators, and that whole concept, and a few other things too, really. But it was just sort of going out, meeting different industry professionals or experts, spending some time with them, getting a little bit too up close and personal in some cases with these animals.
It looked incredible.
Yeah, and put myself
lying underneath. Was it an alligator you were lying under?
Yes, yeah, that was a wild caught but habituated. They tell me alligator.
They tell you that until it adds another set of scars up your other arm.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, when you've been burned by these wild animals, you're wholly aware of how sharp teeth really are. So that was actually, I think, the most nervous I've ever looked on a video in my career so far. If you watch that, it's genuine concern about this little ambush predator that's floating along, giving me no behavioural cues whatsoever. They're so cool. I'd love to do so much more with crocodiles and alligators. I have this terrible morbid curiosity / adrenaline junkie side of me that's just always wanting to go for these things that scare the absolute poo out of me.
Well, one of the best books I've ever read about crocodiles was written in the 70s, and it took place in the 60s, and it was a biologist looking at crocodile populations in Lake Rudolph, which is on the southern end of Ethiopia. And it's called Eyelids of Morning. It's out of print, long out of print now, but you can still get copies. And if you're into crocodiles, it's by far the best book I've ever read on the species. And probably even as I haven't read a lot of the more modern ones, to be fair, but it's the first book I've read. But I would be surprised if there's anything that comes close to matching that.
I very much doubt it, because the research, even looking at how Shark Lab set up in the first place, the things that they could get away with in those days, you never get away with now. So I imagine there's...
Oh, these guys were insane.
Yeah.
It's almost like they weren't worried about their own mortality, that's for certain.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, the information, the stories that they've got, you'll never get again. So you can't really... I mean, it's you've just got to use that, haven't you? But I'll probably look that up, to be honest, because it sounds right up my street.
Yeah, I think you'd
curiosity. Love it. Yeah.
Sarah, it's been fantastic to speak to you today. We've been trying to hook this up for quite some time, but which you think would be easy in lockdown, but then lockdown started to lift, and then we both got busy.
Yes.
But I'm so pleased that we managed to record, and I hope at some point in the future I would get to meet you in person. I think it would be cool to go and dive with you or something.
Yeah.
I haven't dived for quite a while, but I love to free dive. I just haven't scuba dived for quite a while, but I love it.
Maybe I can make a trip up into Scotland when they...
Hey, that sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. You'll have to
maybe basking sharks on the West Coast. That would be amazing.
Yes. I've only ever seen...
I got a friend who runs a charter off the West Coast for basking sharks.
Done, sold, I'm there. Let me know the date.
Tremendous. Are you... there was a whole other thing I wanted to ask you about, but so maybe I'll have to save that for another time, which was the work that you were doing... or the videos that you were working on with geothermal in Iceland.
I wondered if you were going to mention that. Yeah, we are releasing that in autumn-winter campaign now.
Okay,
yeah,
so it's still a little way away.
Yeah, it's a little way away. You can always have me back on for that. But no, I'm very, very excited about that particularly. I think it's probably one of the best things.
Give me a brief overview so we can give people a taster of what that is, and then let's talk again later in the year when the actual video is out, and then we can talk about it.
Sure, brilliant. Yeah, brief overview. I went to Iceland with my camera guy just before lockdown commenced.
This is Sharkman Dan, is
Sharkman Dan, yeah.
Who has the coolest Instagram name ever.
Yeah, the two of us went over there. We were looking at how climate change, you can visibly look at it. We were looking at the glaciers. We met some experts. But the main reason behind that trip was actually to go to Hell Sheddy and to learn about this technology that involves capturing carbon emissions as they're released into the atmosphere and actually sinking those back down into basalt rock, where they bond with the rock and are essentially stored forever. So it was very, very exciting stuff. Mix that with a bit of ice diving and the rest of it. It's going to be quite a fun video, I think.
Yeah, your pictures looked amazing. The basalt's super interesting because there was a paper out only a few weeks ago that was talking about the amount of carbon that could be taken out of the atmosphere if we put crushed basalt on all agricultural fields around the world.
It is the coolest
and it was
rock.
like 200 200 million tons a year. I might have to look it up and insert it in this part of the podcast, because I kept the paper and I have read it, but my memory is not good enough to remember the number.
I mean, from our trip, what we learned was there's enough basalt rock just in Iceland alone to store the entire world's carbon emissions.
Wow.
So the potential...
And the process is fascinating. The actual science behind how it works is fascinating.
Yeah, all my friends think that I'm a crazy geologist now, but it's actually just basalt rock that I know anything about. But it is amazing. It's so interesting, and just such a positive story. I mean, it's maybe not the actual only answer. It will have to be this mixed in with, reducing consumerism and a few other different carbon technologies. But it is just so nice because we've had, I feel like, a couple of years of absolute doom and gloom. It's nice to feel like we can and we will fix these problems.
Yeah, no, it's you're right. It will never be a single thing. It's not going to be everybody driving electric cars. It's not going to just be spreading basalt on our agricultural crops or agricultural land. It's going to be a combination of a lot of things, and a change in mindset from people, like every single person on the planet. And I feel like it's definitely started. I think there's no doubt that we are way more conscious than we used to be of, the anthropogenic effects.
Absolutely.
As they stand right now. I think one of the great difficulties is that it's fine for us to talk about the different measures that we will take to mitigate our impacts, but how can you expect somebody who has nothing and is just concerned about how do they feed themselves tomorrow? To take any of that into account. And also, and I brought this up on a podcast before, when we're talking about climate change, these very rural communities that are basically living hand to mouth, they have not really contributed in any meaningful way to climate change. Yes, there's still a big use of resources, and a lot of these communities sit within these resources that we hold up, like the Amazon rainforest or the areas in Central Africa, which have the most incredible biodiversity on the planet. But when we're just talking about climate change, these communities haven't contributed to it. You might as well ignore their contribution because it's negligible. It's big industry, in the last 150, 200 years that has really contributed to it, which has been the more wealthy parts of the world.
Absolutely. And the sad thing is that those that haven't contributed, that live in these areas, are often the ones that are absolutely at the forefront of all of the consequences of it as well. But, I mean, we are a very simple creature, we're basically bald monkeys for the most part, and it has to be made as simple as possible if we are going to change. And like you say, that's where it comes down to infrastructure, government, technology, and just basically making it so that our lives run in a way that, it's not necessarily every individual that's going to have to think of end life of a product, but our system is made for that now. And that's the only way you're going to create lasting change. It's just got to be like almost the only option.
Sarah, thank you so much. Where can people find you on all the socials and website?
Yeah, so Sarah's Real Job for YouTube, Sarah's Real Job for Instagram, Sarah V. Roberts for Twitter, and Sarah Roberts Official for my website. I say that so hesitantly. I had an agent that made me put the official on the end and gradually
well, at least you know it's
back.
official.
But yeah, I mean, if you just search Sarah's Real Job or search Sarah Roberts and any shark, bear or anything, I'll probably pop up. You'll probably be able to find me. Yeah.
That's great. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Sarah. I hope to see you swimming with basking sharks at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. You've sold me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next week when we take another walk into the wilderness.